Okay, I hit the 15-minute limit on the last video, so I'm starting a second video to continue modeling how to read a poem. And so at the end of the last video I was explaining the symbolism of the abandoned farmhouse, and so I think the abandoned farmhouse symbolizes failure or a crisis of some kind. Maybe perhaps the farm crisis that many farmers experienced in the 1980s in our country. So in that case, it's symbolism because the abandoned farmhouse represents something more than just an empty house. Okay. Step 7 involves 3 parts. So part A says look for concrete pictures or images the poet has drawn. So I'm going to go through the poem and identify some images that help me make meaning of the poem. So something that I can really visualize in the first stanza is the fields cluttered with boulders. So all the images I'm going to highlight in pink. Whoops. And then in the second stanza, an image that stands out to me I can visualize a bunch of preserves and canned tomatoes here. So the jars of plum preserves and canned tomatoes. I can also visualize the narrow country road where the house sits. Here's another image of, instead of the fields, it's the weed-choked yard, so it's clear that the farmyard has not been cared for. Here's another image of the canning jars in the cellar. So these are images that stand out to me that help me understand why they might have left the farmhouse. The fields were not well taken care of. Money was scarce, so they had to have a lot of canned fruits and vegetables. Part 7b says look for repetition or repeated images. So some repeated images I noticed are in stanza 1, the image of the field cluttered with boulders, and then in stanza 3, the weed-choked yard is a repeated image where like the green space, the field or the yard is not well taken care of. And then also in stanza 2, the jars of plum preserves and canned tomatoes, that is repeated, that image is repeated in stanza 3 when it says the still sealed jars in the cellar. So there's repetition of those images. Part 7C says examine the figurative language used like imagery, similes, personification, and metaphors. So I just identified images in pink. I did notice one simile in stanza 3 where it says the toys are strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. So I'm going to highlight the simile in yellow. And this is a simile because it's a comparison, comparing the toys all over the yard to branches after a storm, and it uses the word like, and so it's a simile because a simile is a comparison using like or as. Okay, and then another type of figurative language that I noticed this poem uses a lot of is personification, and that is where non-human objects are given human qualities. So the first example of personification that I noticed is in the first line where it says the size of his shoes. So shoes can't really talk, but the poem says that the shoes are saying that he was a big man. So I'm going to highlight personification in green. On your paper, choose a different highlighter. You can choose different colors than what I'm choosing based on the highlighters that are in your bin. But I forgot to tell you to highlight the images. So take one color of highlighter that's in your bin and highlight the images and I highlighted these in pink. So I'll give you a moment to highlight the images. And then I used yellow, but you can use any color highlighter that's in your bin. Highlight the simile. Its toys are strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. Okay, and then I'm going to go through the poem and highlight examples of personification. And I'm going to highlight these examples in green, but you could use any color of highlighter. Try to use a different color than what you've already used. Okay, so another example of personification is says the length of the bed. So the bed can't really talk, but it's saying that he was a tall man. And here it's personification because it says the Bible with a broken back. The Bible can't really talk, so it's personification. The Bible is given a human quality of being able to speak. And another example here, not only is it imagery, but it's also personification. Say the fields cluttered with boulders and the leaky barn. So I'm going to highlight that now, green, to show personification. And then in the second stanza, another example of personification says the bedroom wall papered with lilacs. And they had a child says the sandbox made from a tractor tire. So that is personification because the sandbox can't really talk. And this imagery is also personification. Says the jars of plum preserves and canned tomatoes. So it's both imagery and personification. Say the rags in the window frames. So that's saying that the winters are cold. but the rags in the window frames can't really talk, so it's personification. This imagery of the narrow country road is also personification, because the road can't really talk. Then in the third stanza, says the empty house would be personification because the house can't really talk. Stones in the field say he was not a farmer. The stones can't really talk, so it's personification. This image of the sealed jars in the cellar is also personification, because it says the still sealed jars in the cellar say she left in a nervous haste. And those jars of preserves can't really talk to say that. Okay, so you can see all of the green that I highlighted. It's all personification, because all of these things within the house can't really talk. But it's saying that they were saying or revealing things about the house and the people that live there. Okay, back to our steps for how to read a poem. The last step, step 8, says decide what the poem means as a whole by synthesizing the separate parts of the analysis into one main idea. So synthesize means to take several different parts and think of all of those different parts and put them together and come up with one main idea. So I'm going to make a note down here. You can add this in the box at the bottom of your page. So I think the main idea of this poem is that some sort of crisis or struggle happened that caused the farmer and his family to give up and abandon their home. And like I said earlier, my background knowledge, I know that there was a farm crisis in our country, and especially in the Midwest in Iowa in the 1980s. And so my guess is that this poem is referring to that crisis in which a lot of farmers had to give up farming because they just were not making any money and they were losing money. Okay, so that is the end of my modeling of how to read a poem. So you can go ahead and stop this video. Thank you.